The motivating question for this talk is, why did Israel want a king? But with a king, well, the king's going to want something, right? And he's saying, well, where's he going to get them? He's going to get them from you. And this is his warning. And this is the warning against sort of like human centralization, is that there is always a price to pay.
레버리지 땡겨! 마이너스 투자 땡겨! 해가지고 비트코인 먼저 사놔야지.
If only I could get to 0.1 Bitcoin, right? It used to be 10 Bitcoin, then it became 1 Bitcoin, now it's 0.1 Bitcoin. At some point, people are going to be like, if only I had 0.01 Bitcoin. If only I had 100,000 sats or something like that.
Do you know why money affect for everything?
I mean, you're saying about saving the money as a Bitcoin is really good idea, but how do you think of the investment as a Bitcoin to use?
이런 비트코인 신화에서 여러 스타트업들을 많이 봤을 거잖아요. 근데 제가 혹시 놓치고 있는 부분이 있는지, 그리고 이런 비트코인 스타트업들이 망하는 이유, 약간 잘 안 되는 이유가 어떤 건지 좀.
피아트가 결국 이유구나라는 걸 이해하면은 모든 부분이 다 공감이 되더라고요, 결국엔.
But I mean, if you want to ask me, I think you should pray.
드디어 그가 나타났습니다. 늘 삐딱하게 쓴 카우보이 모자, 거침없는 말투, 겉보기엔 그저 특이해 보이는 이 남자, 지미송입니다. 그는 아마존 베스트셀러 프로그래밍 비트코인을 쓴 전세계 최고의 비트코인 코어 개발자이자 땡스가 포 비트코인 당신은 왜 부자가 되지 못하는가를 쓴 크리스천 비트코이너인데요. 지미송이 드디어 대한민국 서울 비트코인하우스오리진에 방문했습니다. 바로 이 홀리씨드 모임과 빅데브 모임을 위해 그가 나타났는데요. 홀리씨드는 제 채널 이전 영상에도 언급된 비트코인 크리스천 선교단체이죠. 홀리씨드에 대해 궁금하시면 위에 이전 영상을 보고 오시면 됩니다. 특히나 이번엔 다들 지미송의 트레이드마크인 카우보이 모자와 홀리씨드 단체 티를 입고 지미송을 환영했던 게 인상적이었는데요. 그럼 바로 오늘 어떤 이야기를 해주실지 알아볼까요? 함께 가시죠. 렛츠고!
드디어 여러분, 드디어 오셨습니다, 여러분. 박수! 네, 여러분 반갑습니다. 저희는 홀리씨드 비트코인 선교단입니다. 반갑습니다. 네, 오늘 마침 또 주인공 오셨습니다. 네. 네, 오늘 지미송님의 통번역을 도와주실 백훈종님 되십니다. 네, 반갑습니다. 인사 부탁드립니다. 네, 백훈종님은 여기 앞에 보이시다시피 이제 PR Reads Everything이라고 하는 지미송님의 책을 번역해주신 번역자세요. 네, 그럼 제일 먼저 그 지미송님이 좀 한국의 우리 홀리씨드 비트코인 크리스천 비트코이너들을 위해서 좀 준비하실 강연 내용 좀 짧게 듣고 이제 그 다음에 저희 질의응답으로 넘어가도록 하겠습니다. 먼저 강연 좀 잘 부탁드리겠습니다. 다 같이 그 감사의 뜻으로 박수 한번 더 크게.
I did not expect to learn what it felt like to be a K-pop idol, but I think I feel like that a little bit right now. So that's great. I wanted to talk to the Christian Bitcoiners because it's kind of a small group, right? A lot of people are Christian, a lot of people are Bitcoiners, but the intersection usually isn't very much. Although, at least in my experience, a lot of people that are Christian learn about Bitcoin, and a lot of Bitcoiners learn about Christ. It's a common thing, and it's something that I'm very excited to see grow. A lot of people have questions about money and then learn about Bitcoin, and then they start questioning other things, and they start learning about God. A lot of my close friends in the Bitcoin community have become Christian, even in the last few years, and it's not a short time that it takes them to become Christian. It's not like a revival meeting, yeah, I give my life to Christ, something like that. It's a very deep study. It takes 3-4 years sometimes, and they'll go down all kinds of different rabbit holes, very deep topics, interesting things. I had one friend that was investigating Christianity for something like 5 years, and one of those years, he spent an entire year on this thing called Arianism. Now, if you don't know what Arianism is, it's a 4th century heresy. Okay, it's a 4th century heresy led by this guy named Arian, and it was it was part of the Council of Nicaea, and he was trying to figure out why Arianism was wrong. And it took him a whole year to figure out that actually that wasn't the right path, that Christ actually was fully man and fully God. And that conclusion that he came to afterwards was that, yeah, Christianity is true. Now, with that said, I want to get into something that I've been thinking a lot about. And it is this idea that I think God's design for humanity is actually more decentralized than centralized. And the big thing that I've seen in my reading of Judges and 1st and 2nd Samuel in particular, is that in Judges, you have a situation where God is Israel's king. And you have various judges that render small judgments, and they rise up almost randomly. And they are very different types of people. You have people like Jephthah and Deborah and Gideon, people like that aren't necessarily very prominent, but they end up doing things for God. And later on, you get to a situation where they're ruled by kings. Starting with Saul, and then David, and Solomon, and everybody else. And that transition is what I want to talk about today, because it is instructive in, I think, what God's plan for humanity originally was, and what it ended up becoming. So I want to read for you from 1 Samuel 8. And the motivating question for this talk is, why did Israel want a king? Because if you think about it, it's not something that you say often, right? Like, hey, it would be great if I had somebody that was ruling over me, right? Somebody with absolute authority over my life. That is not what most people think of. Yet what we read is that Israel specifically wanted a king. What's going on? Who would want that? What is that? And that, there's a part of this where I'm going to have to kind of introduce to you a different philosopher by the name of René Girard. And I'm not sure if that's a familiar name in Korea or not, but he's pretty popular in the United States. He's a philosopher. He was a professor at Stanford for a long time. Actually, he wasn't Christian up until his 40s or so as a professor. And the way he came to Christianity was through reading all kinds of different myths, and he saw this hidden pattern in all of these different myths in all kinds of different civilizations. And when he cracked open the Bible and started to read it, he expected to see the same pattern. Now that pattern that he saw was that generally there's a lot of conflict going on, right? Somebody hurts somebody else, and then somebody hurts them back, and then the escalation in violence happens. And that escalation in violence has to resolve itself somehow. You either sort of destroy as a civilization, everybody kills everybody else, or something else happens. And this is sort of like the hidden thing that he saw, was that there was this something called the scapegoat mechanism, where they take somebody that's innocent and sacrifice them, and everybody blames that person for the violence that happens. And then they pretend that everything's okay again until there's more violence, and then they find another scapegoat and so on. And he saw this pattern, and he cracked open the Bible, and he expected to find the same thing. Except he didn't. He saw that it was actually the reverse. Instead of all of these other myths blame the scapegoat, blame the person that was innocent, Christianity inverted it completely and said, okay, this person actually is innocent. And yet, and it's told from his perspective, what's actually going on. So I introduce him because I think that it's instructive in figuring out why Israel wanted a king. Because our conception of what a king is, as somebody that's an authority that rules over everybody else, is not exactly right. That's sort of like the modern conception of a king. King, in sort of like the Girardian sense, is somebody that takes all of the blame, right? I was doing a little research for this talk last night, and I was looking up, okay, what are some Korean myths and Korean sort of histories that I can sort of point to? And I found out King Sejong. I guess when he was king, whenever there'd be a drought or something like that, he would get blamed. So he would go and do penance, right? He would maybe not eat for a while or injure himself or something like that. And this was a common pattern all throughout the ancient world. Every time every time something bad happens, the king gets blamed. And that's what a king was somebody to blame, somebody to cast all of the blame for something bad that was happening. So when Israel is asking for a king, this is what it's talking about, is we want somebody to blame. We want somebody to take the sin for us. So I want to read for you from 1 Samuel 8, because Israel is asking for a king. And Samuel is telling them, you really don't want a king. Yes, we do. You really don't want a king. I'm telling you, you don't want a king. Yes, we do. And he gives them this speech. 1 Samuel 8. If you have your Bibles, please feel free to open them so you can read it in Korean or whatever. 1 Samuel 8. I'm going to read the entire chapter. And it came about when Samuel was old that he appointed his sons judges over Israel. Now the name of his firstborn was Joel, and the name of his second Abijah. And they were judging in Beersheba. His sons, however, did not walk in his ways, but turned aside after dishonest gain and took bribes and perverted justice. Then all the elders of Israel gathered together and came to Samuel at Ramah, and they said to him, behold, you have grown old, and your sons do not walk in your ways. Now appoint a king for us to judge us like all the nations. But the thing was displeasing in the sight of Samuel when they said, give us a king to judge us. And Samuel prayed to the Lord. The Lord said to Samuel, listen to the voice of the people in regard to all that they say to you, for they have not rejected you, but they have rejected me from being king over them. Like all the deeds which they have done since the day that I brought them up from Egypt, even to this day, in that they have forsaken me and served other gods, so they are doing to you also. Now then, listen to their voice. However, you shall solemnly warn them and tell them of the procedure of the king who will reign over them. So Samuel spoke all the words of the Lord to the people who had asked of him a king. He said, this will be the procedure of the king who will reign over you. He will take your sons and place them for himself in his chariots and among his horsemen, and they will run before his chariots. He will appoint for himself commanders of thousands and of 50s, and some to do his plowing and to reap his harvest, and to make his weapons of war and equipment for his chariots. He will also take your daughters for perfumers and cooks and bakers. He will take the best of your fields and your vineyards and your olive groves and give them to his servants. He will take a tenth of your seed and of your vineyards and give to his officers and to his servants. He will also take your male servants and your female servants and your best young men and your donkeys and use them for his work. He will take a tenth of your flocks, and you yourselves will become his servants. Then you will cry out in that day because of your king, whom you have chosen for yourselves, but the Lord will not answer you in that day. Nevertheless, the people refused to listen to the voice of Samuel, and they said, no, but there shall be a king over us, that we also may be like all the nations, that our king may judge us and go out before us and fight our battles. Now after Samuel had heard all the words of the people, he repented them in the Lord's hearing. The Lord said to Samuel, listen to their voice and appoint them a king. So Samuel said to the men of Israel, go, every man to his city. All right, word of the Lord. Usually we say thanks be to God in the U.S. I don't know what you do in Korea, but anyway. So what you're noticing here is a transition from a decentralized Israel to a centralized Israel. And what is Samuel's warning? Well, Samuel's warning is he is going to tax you, right? He is going to take stuff from you, right? And you notice in the era of judges, there were no taxes, right? People did everything, and if an invader came, they raised up an army and they repelled them and so on. But with a king, well, the king's going to want some things, right? Including palace and servants and chariots and armies and all kinds of things. And he's saying, well, where's he going to get them? He's going to get them from you. And this is his warning. And this is the warning against sort of like human centralization, is that there is always a price to pay. There is always sort of like a human corruption that enters into the equation, and we end up paying it, right? And that's something that I want you guys to chew on, because this is something that I've been thinking a lot about with modern Christianity. Is that oftentimes, and this is a pattern not just in the United States, but here in Korea, is that a lot of churches become very, very centralized, usually around the single pastor, right? The celebrity pastor, if you will. A lot of mega churches and so on. And I think that's a lot like asking for a king, right? And the thing is, like, there's almost an inevitability. Something's going to happen, and they fall, and there are bad feelings. And I've not seen a single mega church last for a very long time. And that centralization is, I think, part of the problem. This is an explicit warning that Samuel gave to Israel for this very reason, that there is a tax to be paid. And you're not going to be happy paying it, right? Because you're constantly having to fund all of these things. And, you know, if you look at a megachurch, at least the economics of the megachurch, what ends up happening is that, yeah, you do end up paying a significant tax, essentially, to a bureaucracy. Oftentimes that has nothing or very little to do with, you know, God's purposes and what he wants to do. So what does sort of like a more decentralized community look like? What does that look like? And here, this is where we can kind of see the example of Christ. Because in a sense, this mechanism that Samuel talks about, okay, he's going to be king over you, right? And all this stuff. There's also a promise that there's actually going to be a perfect king that comes later. And if you think about what I said about René Girard and this idea of the king being somebody to blame, well, this is a king that did get the blame before his reign. See, the blame always happened after. In every other myth, what happens is that the king reigns, but they're getting ready to become the scapegoat, so that when something goes on, when there's a famine, when there's a war, when there's something bad that happens, that person gets sacrificed. In Christ's case, the order was reversed. He was sacrificed first, and he took all the blame first for us. And that inversion is what made modern civilization possible. It is what built all of the wonderful things that started with Christ. It's that idea that you can sacrifice and that you don't need the scapegoating mechanism. And if you read the Sermon on the Mount, it is the exact opposite of this escalation of violence, right? He says, you know, you have heard it said that an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I say to you, do not resist an evil person. And if somebody slaps you on your right cheek, turn the other to him also. If anyone wants to sue you and take your shirt, let him have your coat also. If anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with him 2. Give to him who asks of you. Do not turn away from him who wants to borrow from you. It's a de-escalation in violence. And that is ultimately what built civilization. Instead of fighting, you cooperate. And that's, I think, what a decentralized community actually is supposed to look like, is people volunteering to cooperate with each other instead of escalating in violence, escalating in cooperation. That's ultimately what builds things. And I think that is the essence of what God's design for humanity is. Unfortunately, it's been subverted by a lot of centralization, even in churches. But you know, we see it more and more in almost any kind of organization. So yeah, that's something that I wanted to talk about. I thought this would be more like maybe a little bit of a Bible study and a little more back and forth. But I'm not sure what the plan was, so I'll just stop it there and let you guys maybe ponder about it, talk about it, think about it, and yeah, let's leave it there. Thank you.
저희 홀리씨드 내에서 그러니까 왕이라는 걸 사실은 이제 하나님께서는 별로 원하시지 않았다. 그냥 이제 12지파 세워놓으시고 하나님께서 참된 왕 되신 상황에서 이제 이스라엘 백성을 통치하길 원하셨는데, 근데 이제 이스라엘 백성들이 가나안 땅에 들어가서 보니 다른 족장들은 왕도 있고, 근데 그런 게 되게 좀 멋있어 보였고 네, 뭔가 규칙이 있어 보이고 또 더 힘 있어 보이니까 우리에게도 왕을 좀 달라라고 요청을 해서 하나님께서 마지못해서 이렇게 선택하여 주신 이제 그런 내용을 또 사무엘상 그 8장은 또 말씀을 좀 인용을 해주셨는데, 이제 그런 중앙 집권적인 내용이 교회까지 이제 망가뜨린 이제 내용들에 대해서 예전에 그 비트코인 컨퍼런스 2024, 네, 24 비트코인 컨퍼런스 때 이제 교회를 그 피앗 머니가 교회를 망치는 방법에 대해서 연설하신 거를 저희가 그 아무도 한국어 버전이 없는 거예요. 그래서 그거를 저희 홀리씨드 멤버 중에 그 빅피처님이라고 계시는데, 빅피처님한테 제가 영상 드리면서 이거 제발 한국어 자막 좀 만들어주세요 해가지고 그래서 빅피처님이 한국어 더빙이랑 자막 만들어주신 걸로 그걸로 저희 홀리씨드가 정모를 시작을 했었어요. 그래서 그 스피치 내용이 뭐였냐면, Thanks God for 비트코인 책하고 지금 옆에 있는 이제 피앗 린스 에브리띵 이제 두 가지 내용을 합쳐서 도대체 피앗 머니는 이제 막 우리 정말 사회 전반에 걸쳐서 모든 걸 다 망가뜨리는데 심지어 교회조차도 어떻게 망가뜨리고 있는가에 대한 얘기를 지미송님이 굉장히 통찰력 있고 심도 있는 얘기를 이제 그때 컨퍼런스 때 2024년도 때 말씀하셨거든요. 근데 그거 보면서 이제 지금 대한민국에 있는 교회의 문제들, 메가 처치들의 문제들, 이제 그런 것들을 다시 한번 저희끼리 막 소통하고 이렇게 세미나 하듯이 이제 토론하고 했던 이제 그런 경험이 좀 있었습니다. 이제 그 내용이 되게 감사했거든요. 네, 그 역시 지미송 오빠다. 오빠 최고. 막 이러면서 이제 그런 내용들 관련돼서 이제 좀 질문을 좀 드릴 건데,
강연 잘 들으셨나요? 신이 창조한 인간은 탈중앙화되어 있다는 점인데요. 그럼 이 비트코인에 대한 크리스천 비트코이너의 관점이 궁금하실 텐데 2부에서 질문과 함께 살펴보도록 하겠습니다.
If only I could get to 0.1 Bitcoin, right? You know, it used to be 10 Bitcoin, then it became 1 Bitcoin, now 0.1 Bitcoin. What does that tell you? Like, at some point, people are going to be like, if only I had 0.01 Bitcoin, if only I had 100,000 sats or something like that. It's always, you know, you don't know what the future holds.
레버리지 땡겨! 마이너스 투자 땡겨! 해가지고 비트코인 먼저 사놔야지.
Do you know why money effect or everything?
I mean, you're saying about the saving the money as a Bitcoin is really good idea, but how do you think of the investment as a Bitcoin to use?
이런 비트코인 신화에서 여러 스타트업들을 많이 봤을 거잖아요. 근데 제가 혹시 놓치고 있는 부분이 있는지, 그리고 이런 비트코인 스타트업들이 망하는 이유, 약간 잘 안 되는 이유가 어떤 건지 좀.
피아트가 결국 이유구나라는 걸 이해하면은 모든 부분이 다 공감이 되더라고요.
But, I mean, if you want to ask me, I think you should pray.
여러분, 지미송 마지막 2탄입니다. 이번 영상은 지미송의 비트코인에 대한 솔직한 이야기를 들을 수 있으니 놓치지 마시고요. 지미송의 1편 영상을 보고 오시면 이해가 더 편하니 1편을 얼른 보고 오세요. 그럼 바로 들어갑니다. 함께 가시죠. 렛츠고!
네, 그래서 지금 홀리씨드 한국의 비트코인 생태계는 집 팔 비사, 집을 팔아서 비트코인 사자. 대출 비사, 대출 땡겨서 레버리지 땡겨, 마이너스 투자 땡겨 해가지고 비트코인 먼저 사놔야지 그냥 조금씩 내 월급에서 얼만큼 이렇게 모아가지고 비트코인을 사면은 도대체 0.1 비트코인 안 된다. 홀코인은 절대 될 수가 없다. 라고 하는 게 이제 그 한국의 비트코인 생태계의 지금 약간 컬처가 돼버렸거든요. 근데 이제 그런데 우리 크리스천 비트코이너들은 여러분들 땡스 갓 포 비트코인 책 읽어보신 분들 아시겠지만 오빠가 주구장창 얘기하시는 게 여러분 빚지지 마세요. 대출하지 마세요. 은행에 대출을 하는 그 순간 우리가 통화량 발행하는 데 기여하게 되는 거예요. 그래서 절대 하지 마세요라고 얘기를 하셨는데 한국 분들은 너무 스마트 하셔가지고 어떻게든 비트코인을 하나라도 더 모으고 싶어서 대출 비사를 한다. 근데 이 부분에서 저희가 이 댄스커프 비트코인 책을 사랑하는 우리 크리스천 비트코이너들은 세계관이 두 개가 부딪히잖아요. 그래서 이거를 어떻게 생각하십니까?
Yeah, I think that's pretty accurate. Like, yeah, so all right, so I would say something a little different if it was like an hour and a half from now, but because you guys are Christians, let me just put it this way: if you're thinking about money that much, what are you worshiping? Right? What are you worshiping? What are you worshiping? Because what Christ tells us is that He will take care of us. And if you are thinking, well, I need to do this to take care of my family. I need to do this so that I can take care of my kids. I need to do this so that my future is secure. You are putting your trust in money. You are putting your trust in money. And Christ is very specific about this, that you cannot serve both money and God. And this is something that's a little uncomfortable for a lot of people to recognize, but I put this in Thank God for Bitcoin and many other places, but I asked this to people at church. Hey, you just got married, when are you going to have a kid? And they said, well, I can't afford it right now. Okay, what are you telling me then? That if you made enough money, that the money would be taking care of the kid? Money doesn't take care of kids. You take care of the kid, right? Right? God takes care of the kid. If you're waiting for money to go make a life decision, you are worshiping money, right? And in many ways, I think that's the mentality that a lot of people get into. This is what this is kind of similar to like fish swimming in water. They don't even know what water is because they're swimming in it. This is like such a pervasive mentality. We've forgotten what it means to serve Christ. It means putting Christ first and doing what He says. Don't worry about what the world's telling you that you need. You don't need an apartment and a very good job and all this other stuff. He says, go be fruitful and multiply. If you're in a marriage, I think you go and have kids. That's completely normal. That's God's design for marriage. For you to wait until you have money means that you're serving the money. Now, with respect to trying to accumulate a certain amount, again, you're trusting in something other than God, right? If only I could get to 0.1 Bitcoin, right? It used to be 10 Bitcoin, then it became 1 Bitcoin, now it's 0.1 Bitcoin. What does that tell you? Like, at some point, people are going to be like, if only I had 0.01 Bitcoin, if only I had 100,000 sats or something like that. It's always, you don't know what the future holds, and you don't know how much is going to be enough. This is just to calm your anxiety about the future, right? Do not be anxious about anything, but in everything, through prayer and petition, send your request to God, and the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will give you peace, right? That's how you get peace, is by trusting in God and not trusting in what the money is supposed to provide for you.
네, 결국 그 돈을 우상 숭배하지 말라 하는 말씀이고, 결국 그 빚을 내서 비트코인을 먼저 산다라고 하는 거에 있어서 역시나 그 비트코인이 우리 인생을 책임져 주는 것이 아니라 정말 하나님께서 우리를 책임져 주시는 거고, 비트코인은 그냥 우리 생활에 필요한 진짜 그냥 돈, 그냥 그 자체인 거니까 그런 부분에 있어서 좀 명확하게 얘기해 주시니까 그 대출은 조금 덜 알아보셔도 되지 않을까라고 싶습니다. 두 번째 질문 좀 하겠습니다. 또 그 지금 현재 댄스커프 비트코인 컨퍼런스라고 하는 게 또 미국 남부 내슈빌이나 뭐 텍사스나 이런 데서 또 연사로 또 많이 나가고 계시고, 이제 그런 무브먼트나 이제 컨퍼런스 자체가 이미 미국에는 좀 시작을 하고 있고, 최근에는 10대, 20대들 젊은 청년들이 오히려 그 너무 워크이즘에 질려서 반대로 성경책을 읽고 하나님께로 돌아오는 약간 그런 분위기가 좀 형성이 되고 있다고 좀 알고 있는 와중인데, 지금 현재 미국의 크리스찬 비트코이너들은 어떤 이제 그 문화가 지금 좀 이렇게 번지고 있는지, 그러니까 미국인들은 비트코인에 대한 이해도가 어느 정도인지, 크리스찬 미국인들이 비트코인을 얼마만큼 수용하고 있는지에 대해서 조금 피부로 느끼는 현실을 조금 얘기해 주시면 너무 감사하겠습니다.
Yeah, you're asking about churches and Bitcoin and just young people turning to Christ and how much about Bitcoin that they might know in church and so on. So I think the trend isn't just in Korea or in the U.S. It's worldwide, and I've been in a lot of these places. A lot of people are very curious about Christ. I was in Lugano back in October, and there was like a group of there were some Korean people there too, and saying hey or whatever. But there were also, I think, German Christians that came to the conference, and they wanted to meet me and say hi because I'm the author of I'm one of the authors of Thank God for Bitcoin, and they were saying how there is a bit of a youth revival in Europe, particularly among young men. And I'm not exactly sure why it is, but this tends to be the case almost all over the world, that it's young men that are more coming to church, coming to Christ. Part of that, I think, is that they are kind of being discriminated against in many ways, particularly in the U.S. If you're a white man or an Asian man, it's very difficult to get into law firms or any kind of industry or whatever. You almost always have to start your own business. So they feel kind of rejected. They know the deck is kind of stacked against them. So they start asking questions. What is going on? How did we get here? And why am I at the bottom of the totem pole? And so on. And then they start reading, and they start because they have a gripe, right? They're complaining about something, but they usually end up thinking about truth and asking deeper questions, and then they eventually get to a point where they're like, okay, who is Christ, right? Like what is this thing? And they oftentimes find atheism very cringy. They don't think it doesn't make any sense, and they think it's very embarrassing. So they're more predisposed to I guess, believe in Christ. So that's sort of like the macro trends that I've been seeing, is that generally young men are more coming to Christ. And of course, that completely overlaps with the Bitcoin demographic, right? It's almost all young men, right, that come towards Bitcoin. And so there's a lot of overlap. Now, as far as churches and what they're doing with Bitcoin and so on, there's a surprising number of them that are asking a lot of the same questions. And they usually come at it from a different angle. Usually, most of them realize that, first of all, no church has an active investment arm, right? Like, you don't have people trying to figure out what to do with all this money. Like, I'm sure many of you are in churches where they have, some money, and what do you do with it? Well, if you just leave it in fiat currency, it's melting constantly. So oftentimes, about the only way churches can invest in anything is land, right? And it's usually some sort of building. So that tends to be have been traditionally the only method of investment that they've had. Bitcoin's brought up some interesting questions. So they've started asking a lot of questions about the nature of money and what do we do with this money, right? Like, we want a building 20 years from now, but if we keep it now, it's going to be worth a fraction of what it actually is by the time we're ready for a building and so on. So they're thinking, okay, well, if we're going to invest, what do we invest in? What makes sense to invest in, and so on. And then somebody in the congregation will say, well, can we consider Bitcoin, and so on. And then they'll start having conversations and maybe pick up this book and so on. So that's different churches are at different points. I've noticed that a lot of pastors that are maybe younger, so say under 45, if you're a pastor under 45, they're significantly more open to Bitcoin than if you're over 45. And they start thinking about it in different ways. The one part that seems to be consistent is they almost always first think about it in terms of missions, right? Like how do we get money to India? India has very strong restrictions around money transmission, particularly to churches and so on. So those sort of conversations tend to open the door to Bitcoin and then eventually get them. But I mean, like most churches, they're not necessarily technologically savvy, so it tends to take a while, but it is happening, at least as far as I can tell, to some degree.
미국은 지금 말씀하신 것처럼 이제 젊은 45세 이하의 좀 젊은 이제 그런 목회자분들이 많이 열려 있고, 그리고 이제 비트코인을 저축한다라고 하는 이제 그런 개념도 역시 지미송님이 열심히 설명 많이 하고 많이 알고 계시는 와중인데, 반면에 대한민국은 지금 대한민국의 현실은 교회에서 돈 얘기 자체를 못합니다. 네. 감히 불경하게 어디 감히 교회에서 돈 얘기를 하는가, 돈 얘기하지 맙시다 하는 거 첫 번째. 두 번째, 돈 얘기를 당연히 못하다 보니 비트코인의 빗자도 꺼내지를 못합니다, 얘기를. 네. 그래서 지금 저희 홀리씨드 멤버들 중에서 교회에서 비트코인 얘기를 못하는 외로우신 분들이 같은 이제 홀리씨드끼리 서로 얘기를 많이 나누고 있거든요. 그래서 그 교회 지도자분들이, 또 교회 다니고 계시는 기존의 크리스찬 비트코이너 분들, 크리스찬 분들이 한국에서는 특히 돈과 이제 비트코인에 대해서 굉장히 부정적인데, 이거를 어떻게 저희가 대처를 하고 이분들의 인식 개선을 어떻게 해야 될까라고 하는 게 제일 큰 이제 고민거리 중에 하나입니다.
Yeah, it's always awkward to bring up Bitcoin in church.
This is 홀리씨드 church.
Yeah, and I definitely get that. And even talking about money at church seems a little weird, and a lot of pastors avoid it because they don't want to come off as scammy, right? Like if you're up there asking for money or talking about money, people almost always think that you're a scammer of some kind, right? And there, at least in the U.S., there used to be these televangelists that would go on TV and ask for money, and then there'd be some scandal, and none of the pastors of normal churches wanted to be associated with that. So they did that by avoiding talking about money altogether. But the thing is, like, it's very hard to avoid if you're actually reading scripture, isn't it? Because if you read what Jesus actually said, something like 2/3 of everything that he talked about is money. Right? Money is what he talked about a lot, and for good reason. It's the half of every human transaction that you make, right? Like, and so, how to think about it, what to do about it. If you're not talking about that at church, where are you going to get talked about in like a reasonable way, like in a moral way? How are you going to understand what to do if you don't talk about it at church? So, I would maybe try to guilt your pastors into talking more about it. I don't know if that works, but I mean this is an issue that is like just absolutely critical, right? It's something that Jesus talked about. Why aren't you talking about it, right? Like if Jesus talked about it 2/3 of the time that he talked about it, why aren't you talking about it 2/3 of the time, right? That should be something that should make sense for them. But unfortunately, a lot of pastors have egos and things like that, and maybe they're not open to it. I mean, the other way in which I've seen it sort of successfully talked about, and I don't know if this exists in Korea, but do you guys know who Dave Ramsey is? Dave Ramsey? Okay. Yeah. So he's a Christian guy, but his big thing in the U.S. at least is you have to get out of debt, and he has this program that a lot of churches in the U.S. run, where he helps people get out of debt, right? And this is through biblical principles and things like that. And oftentimes that's something that's run as like a small group where they'll help a whole bunch of people get out of debt together using scriptural principles. So that's one way in which sort of that topic of money gets brought up. It's too bad though, because Dave Ramsey hates Bitcoin and doesn't understand saving or investing. He just knows how to, he's very good at getting people out of debt. He's not so good at getting people to invest in the right thing or thinking correctly about money, at least past that. But yeah, those are two suggestions. I mean, it's very difficult to think. To do that, but I mean, the thing is, it's such a part of the modern world. I mean, you can't avoid things like inflation. Everybody feels inflation, and if you don't have a good explanation of how it happens, then what are you going to tell people? And unfortunately, a lot of pastors don't have the economic sophistication to be able to say anything about it. And you know, if you've read the book Mere Christianity by C.S. Lewis, this is one of the reasons why he says, this is why we need Christian economists. You can't just have pastors talking about everything. You need Christian economists talking about economics. You need Christian farmers talking about farming. You need Christian doctors talking about medicine. You can't just have the pastor talk about all of those things. That doesn't make sense. So I would suggest maybe if you are in a church, seeing if there are people interested in talking about like a biblical view of money, because there's plenty of scripture around just money. There's so much Jesus has said, so much in Proverbs, so much all over the place, right? What sound money is, just weights and scales, and you can even read like stuff like Isaiah. There's stuff about debasement of silver if you read closely. In Jeremiah, where your gold has become worthless. Why? Because it's about gold debasement, right? Like there's a lot of things in there that a lot of people kind of miss because they think it's just sort of like poetic language. It's actually there's a lot of things about money that you can understand better if you are studying it more closely. So I would suggest those things, and maybe you start here and then talk about it. But I think honestly, getting people out of debt is a very good program, and I think churches are a natural place where people can come. Even non-Christian people want to get out of debt, right? And figuring out like a good program to do that, and restricting your impulsivity and things of that nature. Those are very good things, and I would say go that way as a maybe sort of like a side door into Bitcoin.
여러분 잘 들으셨습니까? 일단 성경에 말씀하신 것처럼 이제 땡스 카포 비트코인 책에도 나와 있지만 성경에서 예수님이 특히나 뭐 비유를 많이 드신 것 중에 하나가 돈과 관련된 비유를 되게 많이 드셨다. 그러니까 돈에 대해서 얘기하는 것 자체가 그렇게 불경한 게 아닌데 이제 그런 문화를 우리가 막 바꿔가는 것도 이제 우리의 노력 중에 하나다. 뭐 데나리우스, 뭐 금화, 뭐 아니면 두 랩돈 낸 과부 얘기 막 이런 게 다 있잖아요. 그리고 뭐 5달란트를 준 종한테 이제 뭐 5달란트, 뭐 3달란트, 1달란트 종들한테 주고서는 주인이 돌아오니까 뭐 그 1달란트 있던 종은 그냥 묻어놨다가 다시 꺼내오는 약간 그런 일화들이 좀 성경에 되게 많이 있죠. 이제 그런 내용들도 땡스 카포 비트코인에 또 지미송님께서 좀 언급을 하셨었거든요. 그래서 돈 얘기를 굉장히 많이 하셨다, 비유로 성경에. 네, 그만큼 되게 중요한 거라는 걸 아시는데 이제 저희가 이제 아직까지 한국의 크리스천들은 돈을 대하는 태도가 좀 정리가 안 된 것 같아요. 네, 그 비트코인을 접하기 전에 그러니까 돈이라는 것 자체를 복음적으로 성경적으로 어떻게 바라봐야 되는가에 대해서 좀 교회에서 조금 제대로 가르쳐지지 않는 약간 그런 부분이 좀 있는데.
Yeah. It's exactly like Christianity. Before you understand Christ, you have to understand the problem first. That you are a sinner, and that you are not a good person. That you need to repent, and you need somebody to redeem you, right? And with Bitcoin, you're not going to understand that until you understand that the current system is massively broken, and that the system of money we have is one of theft. And until that is a clear reality for people, they're not going to see the need for Bitcoin. For them, it's going to be a plaything, a gambling thing. And this is all a part of the education that I think you guys can do a good job in, spreading, right? Because it is a big part of people's lives, whether they admit it or not. And if you can explain to them, it is the system of money that is corrupt, that is causing a lot of these problems all over the world, and that a return to a sound money, right, even at a personal level, is a very good thing.
일단 그 지미송님이라고 하는 이런 진짜 그 어떻게 보면 크리스찬이자 비트코이너인 되게 아이코닉한 분이 계시다는 것만으로도 이제 미국에서는 미국이 되게 진짜 갓블레스 아메리카 네. 미국 부럽다. 네 한국에도 이제 지미송님 같은 이제 그런 분들이 좀 많이 좀 생기셨으면 하는 바람에 또 홀리씨드가 또 있는 존재의 이유라고 또 생각 중에 합니다. 네, 그리고 마지막으로 지금 저희가 준비한 질문하고 현장에 계신 분들 질문 또 좀 받도록 하겠습니다. 마지막 저희가 미리 준비한 질문은 저희 홀리씨드라고 하는 저희 좀 어떻게 보면 소규모 그룹인데 이제 지금 저희가 드린 이런 질문들을 하나씩 저희 모임 몇몇 안 되는 사람들이 우리부터 시작을 하자라고 하면서 각자가 이제 정말 복음과 비트코인을 어떻게 하면 더 정확하게 제대로 본질적인 걸 전달할 수 있을까라고 같이 고민하는 사람들의 모임이라고 봅니다. 네. 그랬을 때 저희가 지금 지미송님 컨퍼런스 영상이나 뭐 책 읽고 책 리뷰하고 또 이벤트하고 하는 이제 그런 행동들 먼저 시작을 했는데 이제 그거 이외에 지금 이제 시작이긴 하지만 앞으로 좀 어떤 방향으로 나아가면 좋을지 같은 이제 좀 선배로서 네. 복음과 비트코인의 이 여정을 먼저 걸어오신 선배로서 홀리씨드가 한국의 비트코이너 크리스찬들이 좀 어떻게 성장했으면 좋겠는가 하는 좀 조언 좀 부탁드리겠습니다.
Well, I'm going to play the pastor here. Have you prayed about this? Honestly, I think that's the first place you should go. Why aren't you asking? Why aren't you asking God? Why are you asking me? Right? But I mean, if you want to ask me, I think you should pray. Yeah, that's where I'll start. But more practically speaking, the other thing to do is to grow in your faith. Like understand this stuff better and talk to people. Right? Like talk to other Christians, talk to other Bitcoiners, talk to them about what their concerns are. The thing that I find about sort of like public interaction and interaction between individuals, really, it tends to be very artificial in a fiat setting. You don't really need other people when you can infinitely print money, essentially, and be covered in all cases of, things going terribly bad or something like that, right? You get bailed out in many different ways through fiat money. Under sound money, you're forced to have closer relationships and you depend on people a lot more. Now, this is much more the case in the U.S. where there are all kinds of safeguards and fiat money protection, and it gets less and less the further away from sort of the fiat money printing towards the edges of the monetary regime or whatever. What I would suggest is that as you get more into a sound money mindset, more into a Bitcoin mindset, that you invest a lot more into your relationships, because that's where you're supposed to be. I think that's God's design, right? Instead of depending on some centralized entity like the king that we talked about earlier, depend on God and in the community that you have and in the people that He's provided in your life. And I think that's the direction in general that Christianity has always, sort of spread through. It was never sort of like Islam, which conquered entire territories and said, now you're Muslim, right? It was never that way. It was always a one person at a time thing, and it was always done on a relationship level. And I would encourage you to do the same, right? Invite people, right? If you have Christian friends, invite them to here. If you have Bitcoin friends, invite them to here. Start small. And you don't, I don't want to make it sound like you have to go be, doing evangelism all day long and, going out into the street corner like some of the people and being like, oh, you're going to hell unless you, convert right now. Nothing like that. In fact, I would encourage you to be, just take tiny steps of faith, right? Like this is the Christian model. You don't have to do very much. And this is the thing that I found surprising about where my role has become in the Bitcoin sort of Christian community. I really didn't do that much, right? All I said to my friends was, hey, I'm a Christian, or, just mention that I went to church on Sunday or whatever. And later on, when they're starting to study this stuff, they would seek me out. And similarly, I would tell all my church, yeah, I work in Bitcoin, I do this or whatever. And then when they get curious about Bitcoin, they come and ask me about Bitcoin, right? You don't have to be the only source of information for your friends. You just need to be in a relationship so that they know who to contact when the time comes. And that time might come tomorrow, it might come 10 years from now. But be ready, right? This is what Jesus, or this is what Paul said, right? Like always be ready to give a reason for your hope and your faith. And that's where you want to be, is in that mode of preparation. Work on your relationships, be prepared to answer those questions. But you don't have to force anything.
다 같이 아멘. 아멘. 그러니까 정말 많은 걸 할 필요 없다. 네, 너무 거창하게 우리 큰 거 합시다. 그게 아니라 지금 있는 자리에서 내가 정체성이 명확하면 나 크리스찬이야. 그리고 나 비트코이너야. 라고 한 정체성이 명확하면 주변에 있는 사람들 중에서 관심 있어 하는 분들이 알아서 나한테 와서 물어볼 거다. 네, 관계를 유지를 잘 하라. 정말 이제 네트워크나 커뮤니티나 이제 이런 릴레이션십이 정말 이 작은 게 어떻게 보면 제일 큰 일이다. 네, 그래서 항상 이제 성경에도 나오시잖아요. 말씀하시잖아요. 전도에 미련한 것으로 이제 복음을 듣게 된다고 하시는 것처럼 그러니까 별거 아닌데 지금 내 자신 한 사람 한 사람이 딱 약간 어떻게 보면은 이 비트코인과 복음의 딱 약간 망대 같은 등대 같은 역할을 하면서 빛을 비추고 있으면 알아서들 필요하신 분이 찾아오실 거다. 그런 친구들한테 그냥 편안하게 대화 나누듯이 궁금하면 질문하고 답해주고 그러면서 서로 성장해 나가면 된다. 이제 그런 말씀이셨습니다. 오빠 너무 감사합니다. 네, 지금 박수 한번 부탁드립니다. 예, 지금 질문 4가지는 저희 홀리씨드 내에서 질문을 미리 취합해서 이제 미리 좀 드렸던 질문이고요. 지금 현장에서도 질문을 좀 더 받아보도록 하겠습니다. 질문 있으신 분? 네, 이제 번쩍, 네, BTC 오프님, 네.
Alright, first of all, thank you for coming to the BTC하우스오리진, and my nickname is BTC Hope here. And before I was know about Bitcoin, I was in fiat trap. I was just earn money and spend unnecessary things, and I was consistently research about an investment and extra. But once I find out that the Bitcoin standard by Saifin and Amos, and it completely shift from the fiat mindset to Bitcoin. Do you know why money effect for everything? Thank you.
Yeah, so hopefully you guys got what he asked over there. Anyway, the question is really more about, I guess, your personal experience of getting into Bitcoin and then noticing a whole bunch of changes. What happened is really the question. And I'm not sure I have a great answer, other than that the alignment of what safety would call time preference, right? Where you start having low time preference, what I guess biblically you would call prudence. It changes the way you look at each decision. And really, like, what is life other than a whole bunch of decisions that you have to make, right? And actions that you're doing. And, in a subtle way, all those little decisions kind of add up and change, how you change your entire life. You have just like a few habits that are good. They tend to compound over time. And next thing you know, like 5 years later, you're saying to yourself, wow, my life has changed completely. So I don't know if I have a great answer for why sort of turning away from fiat into Bitcoin changes people so drastically, especially over a sufficient amount of time. But it is something that I've observed for a long time. And your story is not uncommon. I've had a lot of different acquaintances, friends, students, mentors. They've all come through Bitcoin and said, like, before I was, paycheck to paycheck and spending on stupid things, and then now I'm saving, right? Now I have a goal, I have a future, and I have something to look forward to, and I'm doing it as hard as I can, as fast as I can, and so on. It must tap into something, or you're sort of like broken out of a spell or something like that, right? Like we're all sort of hypnotized into like a fiat mindset, and then that spell breaks once you discover Bitcoin, something to that degree. But yeah, I'm not sure exactly the mechanism. I just know that it does happen.
So, thanks for coming to Korea, and I just wanna say it's a kind of good report in church that my church is actually talking about the money a lot, and every sermon we have like a 10 or 15 minutes to talk about the money. So like you said, my pastor also told us that like 2/3 of the Bible is talking about the money in the Jesus script. So I try to learn the concept of the money from the church, and I work at the financial industry, so I also learn from that side. So they seems really parallel, but I thought that the Bitcoin could be a solution, but still, for me, it's not clear. So like you said, we should not have some kind of debt to make investments in terms of the Bitcoin, like a 집합이사. No, I understand that you don't suggest us to do the 집합이사, right? But I think your perspective is, in my opinion, so your perspective of the Bitcoin is like a saving Bitcoin. But we thought that it's as making an investment in Bitcoin. So in terms of the investments, the making that is a kind of easy way to maximize the profit. I mean, you're saying about the saving the money as a Bitcoin is really good idea, but how do you think of the investment as a Bitcoin to use?
Yeah, that we're kind of getting into the other talk that I have ready for the main audience. So, but let me. So I don't want to spoil that for you guys. But the main thing is that there are sort of stages to Bitcoin ownership, right? And I think it often starts as an investment. Let's just see what happens and so on. But as you hold it, as you watch it, as you learn to trust it a little more and trust in your analysis of the money, the economic system, and how everything works, you become more convinced of it. And that's normal. So, you know, they say, come for the number, go up, you know, leave with life change, something like that. Like that's a common experience of a lot of Bitcoiners, is that they do that. But you know, I mean, it sounds like you're maybe in an earlier part of the journey, and investment is perfectly fine, right? But just watch it, study it. I think in general, if you own a little bit of it, you're going to be a lot more motivated to learn about it. I know it certainly was for me and a lot of the friends that I have. A lot of us got into Austrian economics much more than we would have just because we, you know, had Bitcoin. And it was like, okay, what is this thing? Can I trust it? What's the basis and so on? So it's normal, and I would say that, you know, study it a little more. It's fine to think of it as an investment, definitely at first, but you know, there's the rabbit hole, as they say, is very deep.
안녕하세요. 저는 그 비트백이라고 비트코인 리워드 서비스를 하고 있는 스타트업 대표인데요. 그 미국에는 이런 스타트업 그 리워드 서비스가 많이 있는 걸로 알고 있어요. 그런 뭐 롤리나 아니면 폴드 같은 그런 앱 서비스가 한국에 없어서, 그래서 이제 쇼핑을 하거나 여행을 갔을 때 비트코인을 리워드 받을 수 있는 서비스를 이제 한국에서 출시하려고 하는데, 혹시 이런 장기적으로 이제 비트코인, 이게 제가 하려는 이런 서비스가 장기적으로 비트코인 채택을 늘리는데 좀 도움이 되는 건지 좀 궁금하기도 하고, 솔직히 지미송은 이런 비트코인 씬에서 여러 스타트업들을 많이 봤을 거잖아요. 근데 제가 혹시 놓치고 있는 부분이 있는지, 그리고 이런 비트코인 스타트업들이 망하는 이유, 약간 잘 안 되는 이유가 어떤 건지 좀 그런 통찰력을 궁금합니다.
Generally wants to
Yeah,
advise as
yeah.
a startup founder.
Yeah, and the pitfalls of Bitcoin startups and so on.
So it's pretty similar with Lowly and Fold.
Yeah. So like a reward kind of thing. Yeah, I get it. And yeah, it's hard to say exactly what causes all the Bitcoin startups to fail, but I know in general a lot of reasons why startups fail. One, like I think the number one reason is like the founders don't get along. they have like a conflicting vision or something like that. Another one is they overhire and then they spend too much money. They don't find product market fit. They run out of money. Lots of things like that. Those are completely normal. In the Bitcoin space, oftentimes they get caught in they raise during the euphoria of a bull market, and then by the time the bear market comes, they find that they didn't have anything. A lot of mining startups, for example, will start thinking, okay, well, the Bitcoin price has gone up this much. It's like super profitable, so let's go get into it right now. By the time the equipment arrives, it's like already too late, and they go bust pretty quickly. So I would say most of those are along the lines of not enough long-term planning, not enough thinking about that. But I mean, I think for you, the big one is product market fit, right? Like that's the number one thing in any startup. If you don't have customers, you're not going to make any money. So go figure out what problems people have that they're willing to pay for, and then go solve that solution for them. Now, it might not even involve Bitcoin, right? But those are the solutions that I found actually end up providing value to people. One of the startups that I was at for a long time was Athena Health, and it's now a public company and so on. But the way it started was as an OB-GYN clinic. So there were a whole bunch of them that the two founders actually bought, and they tried to make it profitable and so on. And then they ran into all of these billing problems, right? Like, how do we get the insurance company to pay and so on? And then they solved it using software. And they knew they had something when every other OB-GYN clinic in the area wanted the same software. They were like, how are you getting paid this much? Go get us this software. And then they built off of that. So oftentimes the product market fit doesn't necessarily come from what your preconceived notions might be. It comes from almost like serendipity. I don't even know if there's a word for that in Korean. I guess I'll find out if you guys get confused looking at the TV screen. But yeah, it comes almost by accident, and that's what you have to kind of watch out for. Oftentimes, a lot of startups fail because they think they have one vision of how things are supposed to be, and they find out that that's not it, and they don't pivot away from it quick enough. You have to be willing to listen to the customer and say, okay, what is the problem I'm solving? What is the pain point that you have? And if you can't identify that, for something that they want solved, that they're willing to pay money for, then you don't have a product. You need a product. That would be my suggestion. Yeah.
최근에 이제 그 코페이라고 혹시 들어보셨나요? 네, 코페이가 이제 코페이 호프님이 이제 그 쿠팡이나 뭐 지금 최근에 어저께는 이제 오늘의 집까지 연동을 하셔가지고 거기서 구매를 하시면 리워드 포인트를 이제 사토시로 적립을 하는 이제 서비스를 이제 테스트로 좀 돌리고 계시는데 굉장히 좀 호응이 좋거든요. 네, 아마 그런 것도 많이 좀 참고해 보시면은 좋지 않을까 싶습니다. 네. 또 저희가 뭐 벌써 너무 시간이 금방 갑니다. 벌써 1시간이 돼가지고, 네. 그리고 저기 마지막으로 또 같이 자리해주신 이제 백훈종님, 이제 당신은 왜 부자가 되지 못하는가 요 책 좀 번역하시면서 좀 그 소감이나 아니면 또 지미송님 이 책 그 번역하시면서 좀 약간 기억에 남는 일이 있다고 하면 좀 한 가지 좀 말씀 부탁드리겠습니다.
일단 너무 번역하기 어려웠다는 게 첫 번째 소감이고요.
아니 너무 단어가 어려워요. 이게 처음에 딱 목에 탁 걸린 게 지대 추구가 뭐지? 막 이러면서 단어부터가 좀 걸려가지고.
네, 진짜 너무 단어가 어려웠고 그래서 내용이 어렵고 단어가 어렵다 보니까 번역하기 너무 어려웠고 제가 딱 챗GPT가 나오기 전에 이거를 시작을 해서 아무 AI의 도움도 받지 못했어요. 근데 그래서 한 거의 1년, 한 10개월 정도 걸린 것 같은데 두 번째로 드는 소감, 그 번역할 때 들었던 소감은 너무 극단적이다라는 생각을 좀 했었어요.
어떤 면에서?
그러니까 모든 문제가 진짜 피아트 때문이라고 쓰는 책이니까 읽으면서 좀 공감이 안 가고 너무 극단적이라고 생각했던 부분도 있었어요. 대표적으로 생각나는 거는 뭐 예를 들어 대학교, 교육, 뭐 그다음에 미술 얘기도 나오는데 앤디 워홀 같은 사람들의 현대 미술 같은 것도 너무 싫어하더라고요. 그러니까 이런 게 다 이제 좀 퍼스널한 그런 게 있지만 개인 취향이 있지만 저는 또 다른 생각을 했었으니까. 근데 번역을 하면서 그리고 읽으면서 계속해서 공감이 되더라고요, 결국. 어떤 그 root cause of everything, every problem에 대해서 얘기를 하는 책이니까 피아트가 결국 이유구나라는 걸 이해하면은 모든 부분이 다 공감이 되더라고요, 결국엔. 그래서 참 좋은 저의 비트코인의 레비톨에 더 들어갈 수 있게 만들어준 경험이었습니다.
다 같이 박수 한번 부탁드립니다. 그 지미송님 좀 마무리하기 전에 좀 지미송님이 좀 오늘 여기 오신 분들한테 하고 싶은 말 좀 짧게 좀 한마디 부탁드리겠습니다.
Yeah. Well, so first of all, thank you for being here, and thank you for being Bitcoiners and Christians. Right? It's a smaller community, and I'm always encouraged by those stories about people that are in this sort of small intersection in a Venn diagram. Yeah, I feel like I can talk about certain things with Bitcoiner Christians that I can't talk about with either Christians or Bitcoiners because there's some knowledge that's missing in that, in either of those categories that I can talk about with Bitcoin Christians. So I'm appreciative that you get to be my audience because I can talk about stuff like centralized and decentralized Israel and which is, God's purpose and things like that. But yeah, I would love to see more of these communities all over the world. It's great to see, and thank you so much. You're an encouragement to me.